Okay, I lied. I'll do case and Coslow later, but Wallace filed his motion to dismiss Lively's reattempt at suing him and finding personal jurisdiction, and it's way more interesting, so I'm going to talk about that first. I don't think this is going to do it. A lot of stuff in her motion was redacted, and so it was difficult to tell the arguments she was making, but he sort of let us know what those arguments are and why they fail. I don't think it's gonna change the judge's ruling at all. There's a bunch of small arguments in there that he goes through, but the main argument it appears she tried to make was, even though he was in Texas, working for a Texas company, and he did everything from Texas, he has declared under penalty of perjury. He was talking to Melissa Nathan a lot. And Melissa Nathan, even though she's based in California, was at some time that overlapped with their conversations in New York. And he should have known that. That's sort of the main argument that was made. And he basically says, like, she lives in California, she works in California office, why would I think she was in New York? There's no reason for me to believe she was in New York, and I didn't ever have any reason to believe that she was ever in New York. So there's no connection between me, Jed, and New York. The sort of main substantive fact point is that Lively tried to argue, well, you are communicating with her. Obviously, this period between August 6th and August 11th is a really big deal because this is the basement situation with the premiere, and then the big premiere, or the distribution started, and Jed was hired right in the middle of there. And so she was trying to make the argument that, well, you were talking to Melissa about all this stuff that you were going to be doing on social media while Melissa was traveling to New York to go to the premiere. And Melissa Nathan said in a declaration that's now attached to this updated motion, I didn't go to the premiere. I wasn't in New York. So no. So I think that one's pretty dead in the water. And then a bunch of other arguments that I think he disposes of pretty quickly. Apparently they made a big deal. I didn't read that whole motion to dismiss, but apparently they made a big deal about like the cell phones that he was texting with and talking with. They had New York area codes on them. And so he should have known that he was talking to people in New York, which in 2025 is an absolutely wild argument because I don't know how many people I have in my phone who live within a 5-mile radius of me who do not have the same area code on their cell phone as me because of where they went to college, or it's a work phone or whatever. So she tried to argue that, I guess, which I don't think makes much sense. Another one I found entertaining was that she tried to argue that because the payments from Wayfair to Street Relations went through the Texas branch of JP Morgan Chase, where Jed Wallace does his banking, that's a connection between everything that happened with Wayfair in New York and Jed Wallace. And it's like, well, where else is he supposed to? Doesn't that actually make it more Texas related? Because he lives in Texas, he works in Texas, so he banks in Texas. If the money had run through JP Morgan Chase New York, it would make more sense. But like that one didn't make sense to me either. And then there's the one that's going to get a whole lot of fodder today in the gossip stuff, which is these allegations that like, well, he knew she lived in New York because he saw a post about the interior design in her apartment, and everybody knows she lives in New York, and blah, blah, blah. To which he replies, well, that's interesting because when you sued me in Texas, you said that your residence, you put in your complaint in Texas that you reside in Los Angeles. But again, I think she's grasping at straws. I don't think it's there. It's nothing more than she had before that to me is going to change the judge's mind in terms of having jurisdiction over Jed Wallace. Also, there's a lot in this, and it was in the last argument about this conspiracy jurisdiction. And the simplest way I think to describe it is it's very much like the criminal law. Stara, tell me if I get it wrong, but like whether it's a criminal conspiracy charge or a civil conspiracy claim, conspiracy doesn't live on its own as a legal action. It has to be the conspiracy to do something. So you have to have an underlying wrong, right? So it has to be conspiracy to defame, conspiracy to retaliate, conspiracy to breach a contract, right? And so what the judge found, and what Jed is now arguing again, is there is no evidence that I was involved in any of the underlying wrongs with a connection to New York. So you can't just like use conspiracy as a bucket to say, well, generally there was a conspiracy and generally you were in it, so everything that happened everywhere is connected to you. So again, I just don't see anything in here that's going to change the judge's mind, in my opinion. And then this one, people will probably also talk about, I mean, I got to give Jed Wallace's lawyers, they're a hoot. They make funnies. They're talking about how Lively is attempting to use these text messages between Heath and Wallace on August 10th and 11th, and they're going back and forth, and they're like, you know, to the extent that there's any question here about where Heath was at any given time, and whether Wallace knew where Heath was at any given time, Heath wrote his text message and then put a winky face emoji. And the Wallace defendant's counsel is like, excuse me, I'm from Brooklyn and New Yorkers don't put winky face emojis on their email. That's a California thing. And then they put an emoji. So that's entertaining for all of us. But this got me thinking about something that I hadn't thought about before, or if I have, I've forgotten it, which is Jed Wallace arguably has the best standing to complain about the Van Zandt stuff, because had it not been for Stephanie Jones giving Lively all of those communications that had Jed Wallace's name in them, Jed Wallace would not have otherwise, there would be no way to identify his involvement in this. It's not like Baldoni and that, like, yeah, that's bad for them, but like they were going to be involved no matter what. But there's a pretty clear link to me between Jones giving over those documents to Lively against her confidentiality obligations with Wayfarer, to Jed Wallace getting named in the CRD, to Jed Wallace, who has a business that relies upon discretion, being blasted out all over the place and every one of us knowing his name, to Jed Wallace then being removed from the federal court complaint, to Jed Wallace now having to go in and remove himself again and correct his reputation. Remember that Jed Wallace's claim in Texas, his claim against Lively, is defamation. That when you included me as part of some grand conspiracy in your CRD complaint and then attached that thing in the New York Times article, that completely blew me up. And now everybody in America thinks I'm some kind of bot farm, which we'll find out whether that's true or not. But if you bring a defamation claim, you better be prepared to prove that that's not true. But like, I think the argument he would make is me and you should have no idea who Jed Wallace is. And we wouldn't have any idea who he is if it hadn't been for Stephanie Jones turning over information that she wasn't supposed to turn over. So maybe Jed Wallace's very good Texas lawyers need to go after Stephanie Jones, because that is the clearest link. Because you can sort of make the argument that maybe Lively could have gotten her hands on some of that in a sexual harassment case down the road. I seriously doubt it, but it is possible. But without that information going from Jones to Lively, there is zero chance that Jed Wallace would have been involved in any of this and would have had to expend the human and monetary resources to defend himself in not one, but two federal court cases.